Yeah?
Hey, can you grab me another beer?
Aquaman always seemed to be one of those superheroes getting clowned on. I mean, it sort of makes sense. On the surface, he's just a man who can swim really fast and talk to fish. It's an easy thing to make fun of. And because of this public perception, the idea of creating a full-length feature film based on the character was rarely taken seriously. From Entourage digs to an ever-changing creative landscape, it's a miracle that we're even talking about this film, let alone that it's DC's most successful film ever. So join me on today's DC Revisited as we get into all of the aquatic acrobats and slow-motion entrances of James Wan's Aquaman.
Permission to come aboard.
Attempts to make Aquaman only go back to the year 2004. Given his penchants for water, the technology just wasn't in place to realistically produce this kind of movie. After Spider-Man, studios started to get a little more confident with the technology for superhero films. But even then, attempt after attempt failed. Reno 911's Robert Ben Garant wrote one script that would fall through, and then in 2007, focus would shift to the character's appearance in Justice League Mortal. While that film would never see the light of day, Santiago Cabrera was cast in the role. Unfortunately, he would never be able to portray him in any form. After this, Leonardo DiCaprio's production company, Appian Way, purchased the rights. It wasn't until Man of Steel finally released that talks ramped up yet again for an Aquaman solo outing. Will Beall and Kurt Johnstad were hired to write separate scripts, the best of which would then go into production. It was a race. Back in 2005, HBO's Entourage would famously have a storyline featuring Vincent Chase leading Aquaman, which was being directed by James Cameron. It's funny while simultaneously approaching many of the very real issues that would come up when making an Aquaman film. While Warner Brothers wouldn't attract someone quite of the caliber of James Cameron, they were interested in giving the chance to someone that had made quite the name for themselves in the horror world, James Wan. Wan had made hits such as Saw, Insidious, and The Conjuring, and had recently proven himself in the action genre with Furious 7. He was given the choice of taking on either The Flash or Aquaman, and he was intrigued by the aquatic superhero, so he took on the latter. Several scripts were tossed out until Wan finally settled on one written by Beall. David Leslie Johnson McGoldrick would then be brought on for rewrites.
What's up? Aquaman's gonna save you.
The casting of Jason Momoa would occur back during the production of Batman v Superman. Momoa was brought into Snyder's office to audition for a mysterious role. When he was done, Snyder offered him the part of Aquaman, which confused Momoa. In his mind, Aquaman was this blonde white dude. What could they possibly want with a large Hawaiian man? Snyder explained his vision, wanting to really marry Aquaman's origins with that of various Polynesian water gods. Momoa brings a rock star aura to the Arthur Curry character, even rocking out with his trident at Comic-Con during the announcement. But Momoa didn't have the easiest time portraying the character, with a lot of his time being spent in very uncomfortable rigs. But he manages the impossible to make the formerly lame seahorse rider into a cool-as-hell hero.
Last time he was in his element. This time, make him fight in yours.
While Amber Heard has quite the negative reputation these days, there was a lot of potential present at the time. She was considered one of the hottest up-and-coming actresses out there, and she had just gotten married to Johnny Depp, so her involvement was a big deal. Her performance, or maybe it's her accent, is a bit all over the place from where it came from, but she handles the action well, and she has wonderful chemistry with Momoa.
My brother has come from the surface to challenge me for the throne!
For the role of the formidable villain King Orm, otherwise known as Ocean Master, Wan pulled from his troupe of regulars, having Patrick Wilson take it on. This wasn't Wilson's first appearance in the DCEU, as he'd actually voiced the President of the United States in Batman v Superman, though we'd never actually see him in the flesh. King Orm is Arthur's brother and current ruler of Atlantis. He's jealous of his brother and wants to bring devastation to the land dwellers that pollute the oceans. He's an interesting character, even if he is a little one-dimensionally evil at times.
Keep the money. I want Aquaman.
Yahya Abdul-Mateen stepped into the role of Black Manta, and while Manta may be Aquaman's most iconic foe, he actually takes a bit of a back seat here. He has some moments, but he's mostly in and out and is more of a secondary player, which is too bad as the design of the suit is really cool, and Yahya really impresses in his limited screen time.
So, who are you?
Atlanta, Queen of Atlantis.
Wow. I'm Tom, Keeper of Lighthouse.
When the role of Arthur Curry's father, Tom Curry, came up, the production went to Momoa about who he saw playing his dad. He was adamant that Tamora Morrison was the only choice after seeing him in the film Once We're Warriors. And yeah, it's hard to imagine anyone else portraying Momoa's father so perfectly, as they have the same charisma and vibe. I can definitely buy these two being father and son. Every bit of concept art for Arthur's mother, Atlanta, featured the visage of Nicole Kidman. She was Juan's only choice, as he thought that she was the only person with the gravitas to properly portray the Queen. Kidman had previously starred as Dr. Chase Meridian in Batman Forever, so she wasn't a stranger to the genre, but she'd be getting a lot more involved in the action beats here, kicking all sorts of ass, even if it's done with facial replacement on a stunt person. Dolph Lundgren appears as King Nereus, Mira's father and a leader of one of the Seven Kingdoms. He's got some pretty strangely dyed facial hair, but otherwise it's great to see Dolph in a big comic book movie like this. Willem Dafoe also shows up as Arthur's mentor Volko, as he trains a young Arthur throughout the years. He has to spout out a lot of exposition, and I couldn't imagine anyone else being as believable as Dafoe is here. The voice cast of Aquaman is absurdly impressive, and something that you may not even notice on first viewing. John Rhys Davies voiced the Brine King, with Djimon Hounsou voicing King Riku of the Fishermen, and finally there's Julie Andrews as the giant leviathan Karathan, who is the keeper of the Trident of Atlan. The movie itself follows Arthur Curry, the human-born heir to the underwater kingdom of Atlantis, as he goes on a quest to prevent a war between the ocean people and the land people. It's about Arthur accepting his place in life, while still providing some fun action sequences throughout. Aquaman also found its pre-production sandwiched between original shooting schedule for Justice League and the reshoots, which saw a lot of change, with directors and all sorts of other things changing. With Snyder no longer heading DC Cinema, there was a shuffling of creative elements to be more in line with the Joss Whedon Justice League, as well as Wan's own vision. Mira dropped the strange accent as well as the dull brown hair, and the characters no longer needed to step inside these strange air bubbles in order to talk, instead being able to freely converse in the water. Each of these changes seems to be for the better and to make the film more fun. Filming for Aquaman took place in Australia in 2017 and lasted 114 days. Water is one of the more difficult elements to deal with on any set, and it's something that's hard to avoid when making a movie called Aquaman. So the production had to get creative, utilizing rigs that they dubbed tuning forks due to their design. They'd strap in cast members and would allow for a floating look. And let me tell you, these rigs were anything but comfortable. But there were other things that needed to be added in order to convincingly pull off the underwater look. First was the hair, which is often a nightmare to deal with. So they instead put markers on their heads and mostly just pinned the hair back. And finally, they added particulates, which really helped to sell the underwater effect. Without them, it just looked like they were floating through the air. Wan called back to his horror roots during a sequence featuring the Trench, a group of terrifying sea creatures. The Trench was even announced as having its own spin-off movie, although we've yet to see anything come of that. Regardless, it's a stunning sequence. Despite all the water tanks and green screen work, the production built a ton of practical sets. They even recreated a town in Italy in order to properly blow it up on camera. Each of the sets was created virtually and was able to be explored through virtual reality, one of many ways that the production was able to stay ahead of the curve.
You want conflict? Why don't you take these chains off, little brother, and we'll see who gets run through.
Aquaman released in the United States on December 21st, 2018, and brought in $73.2 million on its opening weekend, making it the lowest opening weekend for any DC film so far. But this proved to be inconsequential as the movie had huge legs, propelling it to a massive $1.15 billion worldwide total. This meant that it was not only a success, Aquaman was the most successful DC film of all time, a title that it still holds to this day. The movie did okay critically, with a 66% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, with the critical consensus being that Aquaman swims with its entertainingly ludicrous tide, offering up CGI superhero spectacle that delivers energetic action with an emphasis on good old-fashioned fun. While none of the film's cast would return, an animated miniseries was created, Aquaman, King of Atlantis. This would serve as a sequel of sorts, but is non-canon overall. It appeared on Cartoon Network in October of 2021. The Trench spin-off would never see the light of day, despite Yahya Abdul-Mateen ready to reprise his role as Black Manta, who would be the film's protagonist. While that film has been cancelled, there's always a chance that we see those ideas used in something else that Wan eventually does, even if it's non-DC related. If all goes expected, its sequel, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, is coming to theaters later this year, but it doesn't feel like the sequel for DC's biggest movie, having gone through quite the tumultuous production, and having very little hype behind it. Aquaman's massive success may not have been expected, but it was certainly earned. With nearly everything working against it, James Wan and company were able to provide a fun, action-packed adventure with one of the more difficult characters to crack. So just remember, when you think of the highest grossing film of any of these DC heroes, it's not Batman or Superman at the forefront, it's ol' Arthur Curry, proving that sometimes all you need is a fun movie. Stepping away from the ocean's depths, we're getting ready to say that name that makes us super. But that's a story for next time. Join us, same movie time, same movie channel.